All right, Pixar tier list. Let's see. All right, there's not as many Pixar movies as I thought. Honestly, I forget that Disney and Pixar are separate sometimes. So I always think there's a lot more movies to pick from. But this is actually gonna make it way easier because I thought we were going through a bunch. Jeez. Okay. All right, up is gonna go A tier. I don't think it's S tier just because the middle to end bit kind of gets a bit rough for me. It's a strong movie all the way up until that point, really. Then it starts to get a little unnecessarily actiony. I don't know. Toy Story 1 is arguably the second best Toy Story movie. Gets B tier, obviously. Toy Story 4 is the only Toy Story that's better than Toy Story 1 in my personal opinion. But that's just probably because those are the two I've seen the most out of them. Monsters University, the Monsters franchise is phenomenal. Monsters University is almost just as good as Monsters Inc., but Monsters Inc. just has that star appeal because of how old it is, and it's always had a nice spot in my head. So Monsters University was an amazing sequel. It did a really good job, and I really enjoyed it, and I still love watching it. I think it's more fun to watch than Monsters Inc., but I think Monsters Inc. is just a better movie. Finding Dory, I actually really didn't like. I thought it was more of a cash grab of a sequel than anything else. And I tried to watch it too. I tried multiple times and I just could not bring myself to do it. It just felt so out of place. Like, I get what they were going for, but it fell on deaf ears realistically. Finding Nemo, however, is a movie that I have been in a love-hate relationship with forever. Back when I was like really young, about 8-ish, and I was in the hospital, when we were in the waiting room while I was waiting with Scarlet Fever, we sat in the waiting room for hours, and we must have watched Finding Nemo at least 6 or 7 times. It was mind-numbing because it was the only thing I could do was sit there and watch the movie. It wasn't like I could walk around because my leg wasn't working at the time, and I was just it was rough. I eventually came back around and I enjoy the movie again. So it is an S tier movie. It's an S tier movie because of its star appeal, and I've seen it so many times. They're like, that movie it's amazing. It's a go-to. It's an easy go-to all the time. Cars 2 is another movie that belongs in the D tier. It was an awful sequel. And I would argue it might be the worst Pixar movie on this list. They went the complete wrong direction by following Mater and giving him, and they dumbed him down so much for no reason too. It really killed the character. I've only ever seen the movie like twice, and I never want to see it again. Actually, now that I think about it, is Planes not on here? All right, well, I guess I'll have to find out later. Incredibles, another S tier movie. I can never get bored of this movie. It's not my favorite, but I can never get bored of it. I can watch it over and over again, and it's not dull for a second. It is so good. It was a beautiful movie all the way through. It has great graphics and visuals, so and to this day it still looks really good. And so it's one of the ones I can go back and watch anytime. Ratatouille, another S tier movie. They put all the good movies together. What's happening here? Ratatouille, phenomenal movie. Actually, is what got me interested in cooking in the first place, and so that determined my entire high school path. Ratatouille is a phenomenal movie, and I love seeing it. I love watching it over and over again, just because it really does make cooking and being in a professional kitchen seem so nice. The Good Dinosaur is a C tier movie to me. I've seen it about maybe 3 times, and maybe one time in total. The only one of those times have I seen it fully. And it's a good movie, but it's nowhere near as good as the rest of the Pixar movies. It's way weaker in comparison. That being said, Finding Dory and Cars 2 are just way worse. But it's still solid. It has a good message, and it does its thing, and that's really what matters. Up next is Cars 1, which was the best Cars movie, obviously. Had one of the best video games for a Disney game, or for a Disney movie ever. And all the way through, there was one part of Cars that I hadn't seen until I went back and watched it a couple months ago. There's a scene after they're doing the little drive, past the waterfall and all that, where they describe what happened to the town because of the interstate being built. completely missed that every time I had seen the movie until then, and made me appreciate it way more. Cars 3, not as good as Cars 1, better than Cars 2 by a large margin. Just for some reason it doesn't feel as strong as the original Cars. You don't feel as connected to it. Maybe Cars 2 ruined that connection a little bit, but it just seems a little, it doesn't seem quite there. I personally am not a fan of Bugs Life, but that's just because as a kid I really didn't like insects. And the Bugs Life ride at Disneyland, I have a bit of a story with. It's just, I can't stand A Bug's Life. And indirectly, A Bug's Life is responsible for one of the worst things that have ever happened to a great TV show. Because of Bugs Life being released, it forced the DreamWorks to push their studio to make Ants. And the studio that made Ants was the studio responsible for Jimmy Neutron. And because Ants was so awful as a response to Bugs Life, it managed to bankrupt that company. And since it bankrupted that company, Jimmy Neutron was discontinued. And I'm convinced that we would have had just as much Jimmy Neutron as we do Fairly Odd Parents if it wasn't for Ants. So fuck Ants, but also Bugs Life is partially responsible for that. Incredibles 2, A-tier movie, not as good as Incredibles 1, very solid movie, feels like a good sequel for Incredibles, just does not have that same level. It's missing that little bit of oomph to get up there, WALL-E is arguably one of the best movies Disney or Pixar in general has ever made. For the longest time, up until very recently, it was my #1 Pixar movie ever. Because it manages to go for so long without using dialogue, and I just love that. It's so good and such a strong movie for that reason. Monsters Inc. I would not dare put Monsters Inc. in the C tier. Monsters Inc. is an S tier movie. It is another one of the greatest Pixar movies of all time, and its introduction is phenomenal. Its story is pretty good, and for like being early 3D animation, it was good. I really loved it, and I'll still go back and watch it all the time. Inside Out, over time has kind of weakened for me. It used to be like up in S tier level of movie for me, but now since then, after watching it multiple times over and over again, it started to get a little weaker, and I can understand that. The movie has a great concept and a great idea, and it's executed really well. It has a good plot. It's just it feels like some of the plot is forced, and some of the plot seems a little contrived and unnecessary. So it's like I've started getting really annoyed with it after watching it like multiple times. Coco, gonna be an interesting one because I personally did not enjoy watching it. The one time I watched it through, I saw what they were going for. Great message, great execution, great graphics, just not a movie for me. Just not a movie that I connected with, or a movie that I personally like enjoyed watching. But I appreciated it for what it was. It was really entertaining. It's just, I wouldn't go back and watch it a second time. Toy Story 2 is my least favorite of the Toy Story movies. Not for any reason in particular, it just seems the weakest to me, and it's the one I've watched the least. The whole Al plot line, I just don't like Al as a character, and most of the rest of Woody's Roundup gang kind of rubs me the wrong way, which is fine. That's my personal issue. It's just Toy Story 2 always felt odd. Like, I didn't enjoy watching it. Maybe it's because we pick up and move to a completely different setting, and I wasn't used to that yet, but Toy Story 3 handles it way better. I don't know. Speaking of Toy Story 3, goes up in the B tier, sitting with Toy Story 1 because it is better than Toy Story 2. Not as good as Toy Story 1, but they can sit on a decent matching level. Toy Story 3 has a great plot, and I love the daycare, and the way that and the antagonist is nice. Lotso is really at least decently intimidating, and the way that they have the whole facility set up is nice. It's worth. I can watch it multiple times and still enjoy some of the jokes in it, so it's all right. Brave is an A-tier movie, which is strange for coming from me, considering I didn't watch it for the first 3 years since after it came out. It was so different from the usual Disney style to me that I had no idea what I was expecting. But after watching it, and it's grown on me a lot recently. It's a good movie. It's really good. and like it deserves its spot in the A tier. Onward, I'm not gonna lie, I honestly think this movie got very messed up by COVID and like having to release not in theaters for people to watch massively must have hurt this movie a lot, because it just, like, the movie was good, like it was good, but I just did not, and it just didn't connect. It just didn't feel right to me. I don't know what that, maybe it's just because that's how Disney is, or that's just how like this Disney movie was. It's like I wasn't sat in the theater as like, oh, it's a new Disney movie. It felt like I was going back and watching like a movie that's just on, like a new movie that's been added to Netflix. It has no tie to Disney whatsoever. Like, you can tell, but and the voice cast is great. It's just, I don't know what it was. Maybe it took too long to come out or something after it was announced. Toy Story 4. The first time I watched it, for the first 20 minutes, we didn't realize we were watching it in French, which I find is a hilarious little anecdote. But after watching through it, Toy Story 4 feels like an amazing Toy Story movie. The twist, like, I wouldn't say necessarily twist ending, like the ending is really good and does what I wanted to see from a Toy Story movie, especially if we were going to go to a fourth movie. Like, they did it right. Hopefully they just leave it at that. Sure, they can add another movie if they want, but they don't have to. You know, it feels nice where it is. And last but not least, the latest Pixar movie, Disney's Soul, takes the number one spot on this tier list. It actually managed to knock WALL-E out of my number one spot in my Pixar movies after watching it. I watched it when it came out, around the time that it came out, and watched it again 2 more times the next day, and then another time a week later, just because of how amazing this movie is to me. I love it so much. It has such an amazing message, and it was such an important message to me at such an important time. It is something I will definitely go back and watch over and over again to remind myself of like all of the important things to me. It's well done. Like, obviously I feel like WALL-E, in terms of like narrative, or like in terms of what like visual appeal, maybe WALL-E is better in that way, but for me personally, Soul is better for what resonates with me, and that's why it takes that top spot. Like, though, that is the tier list for me. We've got a decent little progression that, you know, kind of edges upward. Obviously, Pixar movies are hard to rank against each other because they're all so good. But, you know, I figured, you know, I tried my best.